The official record is simple. On August 31st, 2004, a Burger King employee in Richmond Hill, Georgia found a man collapsed by the dumpster at 5 in the morning. He was naked, sunburned, covered in fire ant bites, and he could not tell anyone his name. The diagnosis was amnesia, a tragedy. A man who had lost everything, except the doctor who examined him wrote something else on the chart. He believed the man was faking. And for the next 21 years, the record kept making that doctor very hard to dismiss. If you're the kind of person who reads the file instead of the headline, stay with me, because this one rewards it. Start with what the man could do. He couldn't produce a name, a birthday, or a single memory of his own life, but he could spell, calculate, and name the capital of every state. Hand him a chicken, and he boned it like a lime cook. Hand him a broken carburetor, and he fixed it. The skills survived, in full. Only the person who learned them was missing. Doctors ran a toxicology panel, a brain scan, a complete neurological workup, and it all came back clean. Except for 3 old depressions in his skull, blunt force trauma from years before, but he could not remember receiving either, so they admitted him as a John Doe. The intake notes recorded only where he was found, Burger King. And from those 2 initials, BK, he eventually built himself a name, Benjamin Kyle. Then surgeons removed the cataracts clouding both eyes. When the bandages came off, he looked into a mirror and saw a man of nearly 60. He had believed he was 40. Somewhere inside his own head, 2 full decades had gone dark, and he was holding the few fragments that survived. A monument in Indianapolis, a college library with long tables, a shopping mall in Boulder, Colorado. Remember Boulder. It comes back. Here is the anomaly that runs the rest of this case. When investigators later rebuilt his paper trail, the Social Security earnings record showed activity through 1983. From 1983 to the morning behind that dumpster in 2004, the man does not appear anywhere in the United States. 21 years, no record at all. People do not fall out of every database by accident. Staying that invisible is not something that happens to you. It is something you do. For 11 more years after he was found, he stayed invisible the legal way too. The FBI ran his fingerprints. No match. Interpol checked internationally. Nothing. Without a verified birth, he could not get a social security number, and without that number, he could not legally rent an apartment, hold a job, open a bank account, or even get a library card. He went on Dr. Phil. He sat across from Anderson Cooper on CNN. National Geographic put his face on its homepage. Tens of millions of people saw him. Not one of them picked up a phone and said, "I know that man." Sit with what that silence cost him. He slept in shelters and under bridges, washing dishes for cash, while an entire country looked at his photograph and looked straight past it. I'll be honest with you. The first time I read that a face broadcast into that many homes produced not a single person who recognized it, I assumed the detail was exaggerated. I went looking for the one relative or old neighbor who must have come forward. There isn't one. The break, when it finally came from DNA rather than from any agency. A genetic genealogist named C.C. Moore took his sample, ran it against public ancestry databases, and spent years climbing a family tree from distant cousins down to a half-sister. In the fall of 2015, she made the call. His name was William Burgess Powell, born August 29, 1948, in Lafayette, Indiana. The man with no past suddenly had one, which only sharpened the real question. Why had he buried it so completely? His relatives filled in the early chapters. He had left a hard home at 16 and eaten dinner at a host family's table almost every night for years. Then, one evening in 1976, he didn't show up. They found his trailer unlocked, the lights off, his stereo and tools and books sitting exactly where he'd left them. The bed made. Days later, his car turned up, abandoned near a dam. Doors locked. No note, no blood. They reported him missing. and over the years, they assumed he was dead. If these are the cases that stay with you after the screen goes dark, the ones that never lead the evening news, precisely because they refuse to resolve. That is the entire reason this channel exists. Subscribing is how you keep them arriving. Then his family did something tender. They drove him back to Lafayette, walked him up the steps of the house he had grown up in, and opened the front door. He looked inside. He turned around, walked back to the car, and never set foot across the threshold. A man who claimed to remember nothing knew, standing on that porch, that he did not want to go in. That instinct is what a reporter, and later a documentary crew, chased straight into the missing years. They say they recovered a computer Powell had used and that it had been forensically wiped. The deliberate kind of erasure that takes specialized software, not the kind a man who can't recall his own birthday tends to perform. On the fragments they pulled back, they say, were searches of his real name run against Colorado cold case murder files and emails he had disguised to look as if they came from someone else. They tracked down the co-worker who had driven west out of Lafayette with him in 1976. The man agreed to speak, said only that he had been afraid of Powell and would say no more. The 4-part series, which aired in May of 2026, names a Midwestern crime family, points at an old investigation into a Lafayette resident tied to unsolved Indiana cases, including the 1977 killing of a Purdue student named Christine Kozik, and reports that its own producers were threatened and told to stop. It files no charges. It proves nothing in a courtroom. What it does is replace the question the country spent a decade asking with a far more uncomfortable one, because here is the moment I cannot move past. Around December of 2016, roughly a year after he finally learned who he was, William Powell disappeared a second time. He stopped using the name. He stopped surfacing on any record anywhere. The man who had spent 11 years pleading with the government to grant him an identity walked away from that identity the instant it was his. Picture it plainly. A name returned to him after half a lifetime, and the first thing he does with it is make it vanish again. The only thing that had changed between the man who could not be found and the man who would not be found was that now he knew exactly what there was to keep hidden. He would be 77 years old today, and no one will say where he is. Those searches recovered from his machine pointed at Colorado cold cases that are still open. And Boulder, Colorado was one of the few places his broken memory had handed back to him before anyone knew his name. That thread has never been pulled to the end by anyone, in any agency, on any document. So you are left holding 2 readings of the same man, and they cannot both be true. Either William Powell was a genuine amnesiac, a victim failed by every system built to find him, or he was the most disciplined disappearance in modern American records. A man who had forgotten nothing and simply made sure the rest of us never could. Which one you land on says a great deal about how far you trust a clean file. Tell me in the comments, and if you want the cases the documentaries only gesture toward, this is the channel that opens them.